Hi everyone, I'm here today with Thassiane and Susana. We're going to be discussing about bar exam preparation and the actual experience of writing your bar exams in Ontario virtually. So Susana and Thassiane wrote their bar exam in March 2021 and they both passed it, and they didn't dedicate that much time that I know of on preparation. So I think they're the best people to speak with to understand time management and the best approach to prepare for the exam.
Hi everyone, my name is Susana. I am a foreign trained lawyer from Ecuador. I moved to Canada almost 3 years ago to study a Master's of Law at U of E, and I wrote my bar exams in March, both Barrister and Solicitor.
So my name is Thassiane, I go by Tassi, and I'm also a foreign trained lawyer. I come from Brazil. I moved to Canada 4 years ago. Originally, I did an LLM that was more academic. Then I went to Osgood and completed my LLM in common law. Also finished the bar exam in March. Right now, articling and waiting for the administrative call to the bar.
Awesome. So let's start with preparation. When did you start preparing? How did you start preparing? How many hours were you working? So these kind of considerations.
The first point that I want to make here, and something really important, probably not specifically related to this question, is that you always need a support system. And my support system in this case was T and my family. So I feel like we did it together and we went through this process together and we shared everything together, notes, we hopped on calls, we shared tips, comments, whatever we didn't understand. We kind of did it together. So that's really important. We were lucky because we work in the same place and we were both working at the time of studying. So we knew that we couldn't dedicate 8 hours a day to study every single day. So the first step for us was to create this calendar, this schedule, so we would know exactly how many hours we needed to study per day and the time we were going to allocate. So I think that the first tip is just to be really organized and to stick to your schedule no matter what. I think we both had to work a lot. It's not your usual 9-to-5 job. That adds an extra layer of complexity to the process, but it's not impossible. And I think it's very doable if you know how many hours you need to study per day. For me, in my case, I would study 1.5 hours a day during weekdays, and during the weekend I would allocate 6 hours Saturday and 6 hours Sunday. And that's what I did for 2 months for both exams.
It was almost 3 months.
Almost 3 months.
Yes.
For both exams. Yeah.
And I completely agree with you. When you start to think about the studying process and you receive your materials, it can be very overwhelming to know where to start. So it's very important to find resources, talk to people that have been through the experience before. If you have someone that is going through that at the same time, it's also really good to chat about it like we did together, because then you don't have to come up with the entire plan in 1 week and absolutely follow that until the day of the exam. You can make changes as you go along, but it's important for you to at least have some structure in mind, especially if you don't have a lot of time, or if you're taking the 2 exams at the same time like we did and articling together. So it's nice to at least think of the structure, but also don't get too stressed with that because it can change. Marisu and I have different ways to study, to process information. So some of the things that worked for her didn't necessarily work for me. And she, I think, is a bit more organized than me in terms of, okay, this is what I'm going to follow. I'm not going to change it. I liked to have a bit more flexibility in my schedule. For example, one small difference is that she had in her mind the number of hours that she had to study per day. I had a number of pages in my mind, because then I would think, okay, if I finish those pages today, that's fine. If I'm not really in the mood to study 3 hours today, I can do that tomorrow as long as I can finish my pages. You have to have some structure, and then you probably know yourself at this point and how you like to study, how you react to time managing everything that you do, and then you can can certainly adapt that as you go along.
And one more thing to add there is that if you talk to a lot of people, it can be a really overwhelming experience because people have different approaches. Some people are going to be like me and they just need to stick to the schedule to feel like they're going to pass. Some people tell me I didn't study at all, like I barely read the materials. I think that's a dangerous approach for most people because I feel that in my personal case, if I wouldn't have read the materials, I wouldn't have passed. I think that obviously reading the materials is a must, but also trusting yourself and your studying technique. Because as T said, we're all different, and this is not the time for you to start adopting new studying techniques. If you're a visual person, stick to your charts, to your maps, whatever it is. You've made it so far. Trust what you've been doing. You're going to hear a lot of people doing different things. For me, when I hear a lot of noise from people, from outsiders, I get distracted and I get overwhelmed. When I hear 10 different people telling me, or WhatsApp groups just with people saying, okay, but this weekend I was able to study 100 pages, or I summarized 3 chapters, it just gives me anxiety a little bit. So for me, I just try to stick to 2 people that were going through the process together with me and just share everything with those 2 persons, and that's it. Because if I would have started listening to more people, it just gets very overwhelming, especially if you're trying to juggle work, studying, family situations that happens also, and those can be unpredictable. It's just better to just stick to what you know and who you trust. That's it.
I feel like this is very important to have a support system, but don't overextend yourself. Listen to different opinions, trying to anticipate everything, and just trust that you did your best with the time that you had. With respect to reading the materials, I feel like a lot of foreign trained lawyers that didn't complete their JD in Canada, they have this lack of confidence that they haven't encountered the content that they would see in the materials before. So they approach it as they would approach actually studying for an exam that they have to rely on memory. So they try to highlight, go back, read it again, try to memorize it. I've had friends who said that I didn't rely on the index, I relied on my memory. And my reply was, I think you misunderstood the point of the exam. So what's the balance between reading and understanding that this chapter is going to be discussing business? I don't need to remember the deadlines. I know that I can find them here when they ask me in the exam.
I can start with that, and I can even compare my experience from Barrister, which was the first one that I took, and then 2 weeks, 3 weeks after that, I took solicitors. What I did is I read the entire materials, and what I had in mind is, okay, there are some things that I'm not gonna fully get. My background and my experience is in corporate law, so the solicitors part was easier for me to understand, and the other ones I didn't have. For example, family law, I had never even studied that in Canadian university, so it was the first time that I was actually accessing those types of materials and information. So I read everything and highlighted the things that, you know, when you read something and you can kind of feel a question about that. I don't know if that happens to everyone, but some of the things I was reading, I could imagine that being phrased as a question. So I really took the approach of reading the materials as a preparation for the exam, and not necessarily for me to fully understand those concepts and being able to explain to someone else. So I think that made a difference. But I passed Barrister, but I know we're going to talk about the exam afterwards. But while I was doing the exam, I felt that some of the things in my preparation could have been better, just for me to be more comfortable while I was doing the exam. And I implemented those for solicitors. So the things that I would probably do a bit different for Barrister while I was reading is do that first reading, and if you have time 1 week before the exam, go through the materials again, but more for you to understand where are things, where does this concept belong to, understand more the location of the information, the structure of the materials, and not necessarily the details. Don't pay a lot of attention to that while you're reading, because you're gonna be able to find that in the indexes or charts that you can create or that you can share with your friends. And then that's what I did for solicitors. 1 read through the materials. Honestly, I didn't have time for more than that. The week before the exam, you just want to go through them and be very familiar with where things are at.
I think that one of our mistakes when we were studying for a barrister was that we heard that practice exams were so relevant and crucial. And I think for some people, yeah, that might be the case, and they're still important and that you still need to practice them. But my mistake was that for Barrister, I read the material once and then I went through, I think, 10 practice exams at least. So I just tried it all, and that didn't work for me necessarily. I didn't feel very comfortable while I was writing Barrister. And I think this is a common feeling anyway. I think that you're going to feel this way, unfortunately, while you write the exam, no matter how prepared you are, or, well, that's not the case. If you studied for a year, you're going to feel great.
Yeah.
But in our case, we did what we could, right? And a lot of people are going to be in this position as well. One of the things that I would recommend is to read the material, practice 3-4 exams, and then go back to the material. And for me, what really helped is going back to the table of contents and just after reading everything, just close that loop by understanding where everything is located at. So you start reading chapter 1, and then you've got these subheadings, and this is how the information is organized. So you get a better feeling of where to find information when you need to find information, if you have the time to find information. That's one of the things that I wish I would have known before writing Barrister. It also depends. Preparation is very subjective. It's going to depend on how much time you have, how do you learn, how fast can you read. There are so many considerations. So what worked for me necessarily is not going to work for somebody else.
Yeah, I agree with your point about the practice exams because we did the same thing. We were studying together, so a lot of our preparation was very similar. For barristers, for example, we were doing a lot of practice exams, and it got to a point that it was really repetitive, even the questions, but we kept on doing. And I think just to reassure ourselves, like, okay, we got this, like we're getting like 90% of the answers right. You have to really think, is this something that is adding to my preparation, especially if you don't have a lot of time like us? It was the final week. Like, is this something that is really helping me? Like, am I getting something new out of this, or am I just doing them to convince myself that it's gonna be okay? I think that's one of the things to think about too, because it depends too on the like how many practice exams you have access to, if you have new ones, or if you're just trying to save like we were doing and collecting here and there and you have a lot of repeated questions. But I definitely agree with that point.
The one great thing about practice exams though is that it kind of sets you in the mood for the exam, so you know what to expect during the day of the exam. So you know, if you time yourself, and this is crucial, I think that timing yourself is so important, because when you're writing the exam, you can spend 5 minutes in one question, and then that's lost time that you won't be able to recover, no matter how fast you try to answer the next question. So having, you know, a timesheet and sticking to it during the practice exams, that's really crucial. So I think that practice exams are really important because they prepare you for the real exam. And if you time yourself, then you know how fast you need to answer questions or when to move on. And that's really important too. Like if you read the question and after 20 seconds you're lost, I would move on, because the time in the exam goes by really, really fast.
Timing is so important. I've had a lot of my colleagues telling me that they lost count at some point and they were not able to finish the last 10 questions, which is very common. And I really agree with the fact that once you finish a chapter, perhaps PR, professional responsibility, try to find questions about professional responsibility and do just that part in isolation to understand the concept and how you're supposed to study and how you're supposed to highlight. Because for the bar exam, you have to be more strategic and also not necessarily highlight something that you don't know or that you think that's important, but highlighting deadlines with a specific color or maybe some rules, and not overdo it because it might be confusing at the time of the exam.
I think that's very important to have a strategy on highlighting. For me, that changed. For the first chapters, I was color coding with one color for deadlines, one color for exceptions. And then I noticed in a few days that I was creating complication for me that wasn't necessary at that point. And you're right, I did one practice exam. I think it was even before finishing one of the subjects, just to see how were the questions, if I was going in the right direction. And I noticed that my highlights were not really helping me. Like it was very confusing when I opened that page and then I saw saw highlights everywhere. It's one more thing for your brain to process, okay, my blue is where I should look at. And for me, that's not how my brain works. So I started to simplify that and really highlight the information that, when you look at a page and you can feel when something is the key information, not the entire sentence, not the entire paragraph, but the thing that when you open that page, you're going to struggle to find with your eyes if you don't have like a visual thing to make your attention go to that spot. So it could be that line, that sentence in the paragraph that summarizes how things work, sometimes at the end of the paragraph, or even if it's not the key information, but at least where in that page you really think that an answer could be to a question. And the way you can find that is doing one practice exam here and there, seeing how the questions are being asked, and again, knowing yourself and how your brain processes information, because it may be that it doesn't work for everyone. I know a lot of people that make a lot of notes in the materials with pen, like not only highlighting, but making annotations on the side, and that is really helpful. So try something that it's familiar to you. I think that's what I would say. See if that is working, and if it is, continue to do that. I try to be super fancy with a lot of color coding and things that I never did before, and I noticed on time that it wasn't working for me. So don't wait until you're like wasting a lot of time to see that you need to change the approach.
For me, I think I was the complete opposite, in the sense that I read a lot of posts just saying that how you need to color code and the highlighting strategy. And I kind of freaked out because I've never been a highlighter person. For me, I just read the page and then probably 2 or 3 annotations here or there. And that's about it. Probably like 3 highlights in that page, and that's it. And I've never color coded. So I didn't know that strategy. And I tried for a day realistically. And then I gave up, because I think that one important thing to know is that this is not the time for you to try new things. This is not the time for you to learn new strategies, new ways of learning. You've already come so far. You've already made it. You wrote your NCAs, you passed your LLMs, whatever it is. So trust your studying strategy, in the sense that for me, that didn't work. Probably it works for a lot of people. What works for me is small annotations. So for example, if I see that you're going to have to appeal this decision in 15 days, I literally write down the number 15 right next to it. So when I go to that page, it triggers something in me and I'm like, okay, the deadline is here, 15, that's it. It worked for me. And I think that stick to what's familiar to you. That's really, really important. And then of course, the practice exams are going to be a key indicator of what are you doing okay, what can you improve. For example, I did one practice exam in the middle of my studying as well. And I realized that probably I was trying to waste a lot of time just doing the highlighting or doing charts here and there. I'm not a chart person either. Like, I'm very simple and very basic. I just read the information and annotate some stuff, and that's it. And also, we didn't have the time. So that's one additional thing. If you don't have the time, talk to friends and gather information from elsewhere. Don't try to create your own summaries, your own charts. Probably somebody did it last year, most likely. What you need to do, and what's a great exercise, is to try to update those charts or make sure that they are updated. So that's what we did with T. So we gather a lot of summaries from a lot of people, and then we split those summaries, those charts, choose one, because there are so many out there. So we chose one, we talked to each other, and we split it in half. So T was going to check whether the document was updated from page 1 to 50, and I would check from 50 to 100. That's a good strategy, because you're not alone. So team up with someone, and don't try to do things by yourself, because it's very demanding. It's a lot of work. It can get overwhelming. And if you're working at the same time, it gets hard. There are priorities, right? So you need to consider those too, and how much time you're willing to sacrifice in order to pass this exam.
I agree 100%. And just to close that point, it's important for you to have in mind that it's not a competition with other people. So there's not a limited number of people that will pass. So just be generous with other people. If you have the time to prepare charts and summaries, because you're only taking one exam, or you're not working, or you live by yourself, you don't have to take care of kids and all of that. Be generous to other people to share the information that you created, and that will come back to you. We didn't have a lot of time, but the things that we were able to organize on our own, we shared with each other and with other people that we could share that information to. What happens is that comes back to you, and then you create this network of information and tips that can only help everyone, because the process itself, it's already complicated. There's not so much guidance from the law society, so just try to be helpful and generous. I think that's a tip for life, but for the bar exam, it's very applicable.
Yeah, I think that the way to see it is this is not a competition. You're in it together. And a lot of people struggle passing these exams. A lot of people have personal circumstances that we're not aware of, and they're trying really, really hard. So just being generous is truly important, in the sense that this is not high school anymore. You don't need to keep your notes for yourself, or you're going to get a specific grade. No, you're passing or you're failing, and that's it. If you can help people to pass, well, you pass with them. That's even amazing. For example, it wouldn't have been the same for me if one of us failed and the other one passed. I would have felt awful, even if I would have been the one passing, because this was a team effort. I feel like that's the way you need to approach it. You're in it together. It's great when you can share that path with somebody else too.
I totally agree. Cooperation with your network is so important. What JD students do when they get those materials, the materials are issued end of April, they get together, they split it, they update the previous indices, the notes, charts, and they put it together, and then they go their separate ways and study. It would be great if this network existed among LLM students, where they can find these materials instead of buying indices, because you can buy the OLE exam and they give you the index for free, but you still have to pay $100. While if you had a friend, or if you put together a group and updated them, you wouldn't have to. And speaking of indices, how important is it to study the index itself and to familiarize yourself with the keywords that you will find there? Maybe highlight things in your index.
I think that this is going to be a bit of a controversial point. I think that for Barrister, my indices partially helped, I want to say. The issue is that in order for them to work, you must be, one, really familiar with your indices, and two, you must make sure that they actually contain the keywords. What I felt happened during the bar exam is that I don't know why I had the feeling that somebody preparing the bar exam obviously knows that those indices are out there, so they kind of know the keywords that are included there, and they don't put it in the question. So it's not that obvious to link the question to the keyword you need to find in the index. So that was really challenging, and I realized that a lot of the questions that I answered were from my memory because I couldn't find the keyword in the index. What we did for Solicitor is to take a different approach, because we only had 2 weeks. We didn't have the time to prepare our own indices, so we didn't rely that much in the indices for Solicitor. What we did is we read the material once, and then we went through key points and just trying to understand the structure, and I used the table of contents more than the index, which can be really problematic, and I don't suggest people do this. But I think that if I would have known that the indices were not going to be that helpful for me, I would have prepared them from the start. We just didn't have the time to do that.
Yeah, I think the way to see it is that it is a useful tool, but you can't rely 100% on them. And sometimes the practice exams are done by the same company that is selling you the index. So you may do that practice exam and feel super confident about it because you can find everything in the keyword, but that's not necessarily how the bar exam will be. If you're using the indexes I did for the barristers too, I would recommend having a very good strategy for the actual exam, which is, okay, I read the question, thought of a keyword, I go to my index, it's not there. Maybe I'll try one more time, but that's it. That's all the time that I'm giving to the index for this question. Then I can either skip the question or just think about it. For my first 5 questions of the barrister exam, I felt like my brain was turned off because I was like a robot that was like, where's my keyword? I'm going to go to my index. And if you just think about it, you read the materials, you may have like a good idea, or at least you can eliminate 2 or 3 options from there. So just be mindful when you start the exam, even train before being present in that moment and sticking to your strategy of not wasting time trying to find the keywords. If the index is not working for that question, move on, or at least read it and think it. So I think they are good, but at the same time, you can't rely 100% on that.
Yes, I agree with respect to the index. I found barristers more helpful than the solicitors. For the solicitors, it felt like I was trying 3 different keywords that were not there. I would just guess. I want to ask about the days before the exam, because there are different strategies. There are candidates who study until midnight or 2 a.m. before the day of the exam, and they go to the exam exhausted. And there are people who say 2 days before the exam, I did what I did. I don't care. Now I'm resting. I'm watching comedies and I'm relaxing. So what's the best approach?
The middle.
In the middle for sure. I think we tried both, as a matter of fact. For
Sure.
barrister, we tried the approach of chilling the day before the exam. So let's say we wrote the exam on a Saturday, and that Friday we finished work at 5.
I think we took the Friday off.
We took the Friday off.
Mm-hmm.
So that's if you're working, it's key to take a day off before the exam, at least the day off. We were able to take the Friday off and we relaxed. So we said, okay, nothing, we're not doing anything at all that Friday. And then on Saturday, we did struggle. I don't think that studying up until 2 in the morning that Friday would have made a difference. I think that we just struggled with exam with barrister, because in my opinion, barrister is a bit more challenging than solicitor, but that's due to my background and my experience. But for solicitor, we changed the approach and we did study that Friday before the exam. I would never ever suggest somebody to study until 2 in the morning if they're going to write an exam at 11 a.m. or let's say 2 p.m. the very next day. Study, but take it easy. Finish at 6 p.m. and that is it. Give yourself some time to rest, to watch a movie, order some food, whatever it is. Just spoil yourself because you studied really hard and it's not going to make any difference. It is what it is.
I agree. And the exam is also an endurance exam. So you want to be well rested. You don't want to be tired, sleepy, or even with your brain too tired, your eyes too tired. So it's nice to give yourself a break. But like Maria Sue said, for solicitors, my concern, I think we can share that, was, okay, I want to make sure that I know the structure of those materials so that I can feel really comfortable, that I don't have to rely too much of my index. I just didn't want to have that feeling that I have for barristers of it's all happening too fast and the time is not stopping here and I need to take a break, but I can't. So I wanted to just feel more comfortable. So on the Friday, I really took the day to look at all the materials, study the table of contents itself. So go through the heading, the subheading, and just force your memory to remember what you have in there, what is that pertaining to. If you don't remember, just open there, one quick read through that page, see what it's talking about. That's what I did for solicitor. For barrister, it was really a day off, really relaxing, but you're not fully relaxing, right? Because you know that you have that thing tomorrow. So I think the theme of the conversation is do what you're used to doing, like how your brain usually works. I know that I can't fully relax one day before this big thing in your life, like that you have been preparing for 2 months. So don't try to pretend that, oh, I'm just going to chill the entire day. If you're still worried, it's going to be in your mind. So you might as well just go there and do a quick reading. Then have a nice night, enjoy, rest. And I didn't study on the day of the exam. I just wanted to be well rested, meditating, being like quiet, and then doing the exam.
That's amazing. I did the same for barristers. I took the day off, and then for solicitors, I was just going through the table of contents the day before. What I think that we should also mention that we should avoid is not call people and ask them about their experience. What I did for barristers, which was my first exam, was calling my friends and asking them, how many questions were you able to search? I had so many different opinions about saying 80% of the questions, 50% of the questions. My friends were like, you should find all the questions within 1 minute and 45 seconds. And I had a panic attack because I'm like, I cannot find all the questions in 1 minute and 45 seconds. So it's important to go there with that mindset of what works for you. For me, it worked that I had a window of 10 questions. I knew that I had 17 minutes and I was focusing within those 17 minutes in those 10 questions. And when I was close to the end of those 17 minutes, I would just speed up until I was done with that block of questions, instead of just checking the time at the entire time and making sure that you do catch up, because it's a different catch up when you have questions, and it's a different catch-up when you had to do each question and see, was it 1 minute 45? What helped you during those last hours or days of understanding what your approach is going to be during the exam?
I think you don't fully know until you actually write the exam. That's the thing. You can prepare yourself as much as you want to, but we were not fully ready for the exam and what we experienced during the exam. And I think that's because nobody ever told us how it really was. From the people that all of them, they told us it was really easy. You just barely need to read the materials. The materials are there and you need to read them and you need to study for sure. It's not easy. Personally for me, it wasn't easy. And during the exam, I felt that I could have done more, but I guess you're always going to feel like that. But in terms of how I approach the questions, it's also whatever is familiar to you. In my case, I don't like to revise questions again. So I just knew that, I was not going to give myself a 15-minute slot at the end of the exam to go back to whatever I thought wasn't correct. For me, it is what it is. If I move on to the next question, I know that I won't come back. But that's my approach. Some other people did save some time at the end of the exam and went back to the questions, and that also works.
My approach was pretty similar. There are some charts that you can find online that show you, okay, if you are in 1 hour and a half, you should be at question 50, for example. So I had those in front of me, and every 10 or 15 questions, I would look at the chart and see if I was okay with time. I agree with Yona that checking that every question is nerve-wracking, and it is some time, like you're spending at least a few seconds doing that. I liked to have some guidance, so I used those charts to make sure I was on time.